Do you know what happens when you buy a stock? Most people would assume that their brokerage would go out and get a stock certificate under their name. This way, even if the brokerage collapsed, those shares would belong to you. But this is actually not what happens. When you buy a stock from your brokerage, you basically get an IOU contract from the brokerage. This contract gives you certain rights to the stock, but not ownership. Before you get mad at the brokerages though, you should know that they don't own the stock either. When they want to buy or sell a stock on behalf of their clients, they have to send their order to the Depository Trust Company or the DTC, also known as Cede Co. The DTC will issue the brokerage an IOU statement, and this is what gets passed down to you. So it's actually the DTC that not only owns your stock, but also virtually all publicly traded shares and securities in the US and 131 other countries. According to their official website, their job is to bring efficiency to the securities industry by retaining custody of, wait for it, $54.2 trillion. And that was as of July 2017. Since then, the US stock market has grown $18 trillion, and the US has issued trillions of dollars worth of bonds. So the DTC's total assets are likely well above $70 trillion today. So here's how Cede Co grew to owning the world. Taking a look back, the story of DTC dates back to the 1960s. America had not only recovered from the Great Depression, but the economy, and more specifically the automotive industry, was booming. Americans were making and spending more money than ever before. Most of these guys had no interest in saving or investing. Either they themselves or their parents had lost everything to the Great Depression, so they felt that it was way better to just live in the moment. This is what really spawned the terrible but extremely common trend of living paycheck to paycheck. If your retirement can be ruined by some irresponsible financial institution, why save in the first place? Despite this popular sentiment, given how large and diverse America is, there were naturally some people who still wanted to invest their money. And given that these guys were making more money than ever before, they were able to invest more money than ever before. This resulted in unprecedented trade volume leading into the 1970s. The New York Stock Exchange was regularly processing more than 8 million shares per day. Now, compared to today's 6 billion shares per day, this was nothing. But they didn't have computers or fancy technology that could just automatically execute each trade. So they had to manually handle 8 million shares every single day, and this was basically their limit. So in 1968, the NYSE decided to create a securities clearing firm called the Central Certificate Service, or the CCS. The CCS was basically responsible for automating the stock market. The president of the NYSE at the time, Robert Hack, promised, quote, "We are going to automate the stock certificate out of business by substituting a punch card." Instead of keeping track of ownership through stock certificates, the CCS kept all the stock certificates to themselves and tracked ownership through electronic records. The NYSE hoped to reduce the prevalence of stock certificates by 75% with the CCS. But there was one major issue: 2/3 of brokers refused to use the service. Electronic records were extremely attractive for brokers, but they didn't trust the CCS or computers in general for that matter. So most brokers opted to continue in their old ways. Despite this, the CCS continued to expand their services and attempted to build credibility. In 1970, for instance, CCS's services were extended to the American Stock Exchange. Around the same time, we also saw the creation of the Banking and Securities Industry Committee, or BASIC. BASIC gave bankers and brokerages a way to propose rules and standards that the CCS must follow. Banks and brokers deliberated for years about how CCS should be run, but eventually, in 1973, BASIC members agreed to create a beefed up version of the CCS called the DTC. Once the DTC was created, more and more brokerages jumped on board. Though most brokerages didn't use the CCS, they wanted to use it. They simply didn't want to explain to their clients that they will no longer receive stock certificates because the brokerage is either too lazy or didn't want to handle that much paper. But as notable banks and brokerages embraced the DTC, smaller institutions flooded in. Now, that's all cool and all, but how exactly does the DTC work? Well, I explained it as an IOU contract at the beginning, but it's of course not that simple. Whenever a brokerage or bank agrees to work with the DTC will take all of the institution's stock certificates, bond certificates, and money market instruments and enter them into their database. The DTC already owns billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of each security. So they'll mark down that Chase has rights to 10.4% of DTC's Apple shares and 12% of their Google shares, and so on and so forth. As buy and sell orders flow in during the day, the DTC tallies up the total inflow and outflow of each of their clients for each security. The DTC simply changes the numbers in their database to reflect the result of the trading day. For example, Chase's stake in Apple might be reduced to 10.2%. and their stake in Google might be increased to 12.2%. But no stock certificates are actually being swapped and no paper is being traded. The DTC only settles securities at the end of each day, and each security takes different amount of times to process based on their time sensitivity. For example, options have expiration dates, so they're processed within 1 business day. Stocks, on the other hand, take 2 business days, while slower moving assets like bonds take 3 days. If you have a cash brokerage account, you're probably well aware of these settlement times. Once you sell a stock, you actually have to wait 2 days to get your money. But with most brokerage accounts, the brokerage will simply give you the money instantly, and they'll be reimbursed by the DTC over the next few days. So a lot of stock buyers are completely unaware of settlement times, but that's what's going on in the background whenever you buy or sell. Buying and selling only accounts for a small portion of the stock market though. Most people simply hold on to their stocks for years, if not decades. So what happens to shares that are simply held? Well, the DTC gives their clients a certain amount of rights to their shares. For example, clients will retain voting rights, the right to use the shares as collateral, and the right to buy and sell options using the underlying stock. The DTC will also process dividend payments and ensure that each client is paid out appropriately. In essence, the DTC basically takes care of everything. I think it's pretty clear why banks prefer this over trading billions of stock certificates per day. All of this still leaves the question, is your brokerage or bank associated with the DTC? Well, if you live in the US, the answer is yes. Unless you keep your money in some obscure offshore bank, it's almost a certainty that your brokerage and bank work directly with the DTC. The DTC does publicly post all the institutions they work with, so you can go check out that list if you're interested. But the easiest way to identify affiliation with the DTC is to simply check if your brokerage allows for transferring to or from other brokerages. Brokerages don't want to complete transfers manually, especially for customers that are leaving. So if you have the ability to easily transfer to another brokerage, it's because the brokerage simply offloads the transferring responsibility to the DTC. Also, just because your brokerage is associated with the DTC doesn't mean that it's impossible for you to get a stock certificate. It is nearly impossible, as brokerages put up as many roadblocks as they can, and I really don't recommend you try to do this. But if you want the certificate for novelty purposes or something, you can ask your broker, and they're required by state law to give you your certificate. The process will likely take months, you'll probably be charged hundreds of dollars, and you'll end up spending hours on the phone with your brokerage. But if you're super persistent, you should be able to get it. This too is changing fast though. It's just a matter of time until it's impossible to get a stock certificate. In the UK, for example, stock certificates will no longer be a thing starting in 2025. This is really nothing to worry about, as it's simply the far overdue digitalization of this part of the industry. But as you would guess, this has sparked a lot of conspiracies regarding the DTC. Before we put on our tinfoil hats, let's discuss some legitimate concerns with Cede Co. First of all, given the sheer volume of money Cede handles, it's possible that an insider steals some of that money. Stealing $1 billion from Cede would be like stealing $1 from someone who has $54,000. Stealing $10 million would be like stealing just 1 cent. Cede only has 12 directors and half a dozen employees, so theoretically, it wouldn't be that hard for insiders to collude and steal serious amounts of money. Again, this is improbable, but seeing cases like Bernie Madoff, it is possible. The second, more serious concern is illegal short selling. The process is super convoluted and technical, but in essence, hedge funds are able to leverage the DTC settlement time and a borrowing program to engage in naked short selling, which is illegal. The problem can probably be addressed by some changes in regulation, but the government is too lazy to do anything about it until it actually leads to some sort of tangible consequences. So in the meantime, the DTC is enabling naked short selling. And finally, the third major concern is that there's very little transparency from the DTC. Given the scale of money that they deal with, all of their activities should be public knowledge and heavily scrutinized. But only the DTC and their banker clients have access to DTC's daily activities. Making this information public wouldn't necessarily prevent a well-thought-out scheme from taking place, but it would reduce the chances. Anyway, moving on to the conspiracy, some people believe that Cede Co is owned by the billionaires of the world and used to crash the stock market for their benefit. Cede Co is a private company and it's officially owned by its clients. But some believe that these clients are actually just a handful of powerful families like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. There seems to be some sort of unverifiable evidence that these families have stakes in the company. But even if they did, it doesn't have to be nefarious. If you were rich, you'd probably deal with the DTC directly as well instead of going through brokers. Another piece of evidence that's used to propel this conspiracy is that in the early 1990s, Jim McNabb, who was a director at the DTC, told the media that the DTC's first controlled test was 4 or 5 years ago. This means that he was probably referring to Black Monday and the stock market crash of 1987. Trading volume is generally the highest during stock market crashes because investors are most emotional during these time periods. In 2007, for instance, the DTC settled transactions that were worth $513 trillion. So I'm pretty sure Jim was just referring to testing if the DTC could efficiently handle that much volume. But conspiracists believe that Jim slipped up and accidentally admitted to causing the crash. Now, is the DTC intertwined with a bunch of hedge funds and market maker manipulation games? I'm sure they are. But do I believe that the DTC is a conspiracy organization created specifically to crash and pump markets? No, not really. And even if that is the case, it's not like we can do anything about it. So it's probably best to not look too into it. But that's just what I think. Do you guys think Cede Co is involved in nefarious activities? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you've never heard about this company till now. And of course, consider joining our Discord community to suggest future video ideas and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.